Hey, everybody, welcome back to Lettermen Row, and welcome to Defensive Line Week. Larry Johnson's Rushmen, always under the spotlight. We're breaking them down right now at Lettermen Row as the season starts to get a little bit closer. That's Spencer Holbrook. That's Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. Uh, you lose Chase Young. That's not a good thing. But if anybody is in position to move on and weather the storm of losing maybe the best pass rusher in school history, Larry Johnson's got the group that might be able to do it.
It's crazy that losing Chase Young is probably not the most difficult thing to replace among the defensive line losses. Replacing Devon Hamilton and Jayshon Cornell and Robert Landers is a much more daunting task, I think, than replacing Chase Young, which sounds ludicrous to suggest. But you have to rely on Teron Vincent coming back and being healthy. You have to expect Tommy Togiai to be able to step up and be like the man at defensive tackle. And then you have to figure out how to rotate a defensive line group, a defensive end group that's extremely talented, still raw. I mean, you have guys like Zach Harrison and Tyler Friday and Javonte Jean-Baptiste and Tyreke Smith, who I think is going to have a huge year. I think Tyreke Smith is going to be a first-round pick for Ohio State a year from now.
But a healthy Tyreke Smith.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the challenge is how do you replace the interior, not how do you replace the best defensive lineman in the history of the school, which is crazy.
We'll get to that a lot more with that defensive tackle because you make a great point about, the really daunting sort of proposition there. They have the 4 and 5 star guys capable of doing it, but they've never been full-time starters. But we saw, we were staked out for that first day of voluntary workouts, and Tyreke Smith walking in, and he made the most of being at home during quarantine. I mean, you look at his body, he looks like, what you would expect from him with all the potential that we talked about for several years. He was supposed to be the guy to take the torch from Chase Young. Can still certainly do that, but he's really been hampered, the last couple of years by injuries and never been able to show really that 5-star first-round draft pick potential in him. Now, again, we didn't watch them work out. We watched them walk in shorts and T-shirts, but he looked physically unlike he ever has in his career.
It's kind of been bad luck for him, right? He hasn't had any of the big injuries you would think that you have on the defensive side of the ball, but he's just had the little hamstring tweak, the little ankle tweak. It's like, you just hope that he has a little bit of good luck, because if he has some luck and if he can stay healthy, he's going to be a dominant defensive end. I think if you line him up opposite of any of Jonathan Cooper or Javonte Jean-Baptiste or Zach Harrison or any of those guys, he is going to cause a ton of problems for offensive lines. I don't think he can have the type of impact that Chase Young had, because that's impossible. But for him,
it's a pretty high standard.
If he can stay healthy, I think he could be, like Berm said, the next first-round pick in this group.
When Tyreke was being recruited in an early part in his career, I thought that his trajectory was like an Adolphus Washington. Maybe he'd get into like the 6'4", 275, 280 range and play some 3-tech and slide around. But as you mentioned, like when we saw them show up at the WAC a few weeks ago, that looked like a dude who was 6'4", 265 and has changed his body since we saw him in January. So it's definitely a guy that I think you pencil in as a definite starter, and then you rotate, as Spencer said, those other 4 guys really kind of as the opposite, and then rotating them down the line into the Rushmen packages that like Ohio State likes to use. But Tyreke's a guy that's going to have to be on the field a lot.
Yeah, I don't want to, speak for him, but it's almost like the light has gone off that, yes, the injuries are part of it and bad luck, but, this is it. Like, he didn't plan on being at Ohio State for 4 years, and if you don't fully commit, Chase Young went through this as well when people asked about the motor, and, he was dealing with the injuries as a sophomore, both ankles, but people asked these questions. When the NFL scouts and talent evaluators and GMs are looking at it, they're not really going to use that as an excuse, and they might not. If Chase Young had said to them, both of my ankles were sprained, that's why I took some plays off. Well, they're not going to accept that as a reason. So for Tyreke Smith, everybody knows who he is, but this is it. If you're going to come out after this year, then you better go look like Chase Young. You better play physically like that. You better attack your weight room any way you can. I know the situation's not the same, but you better be the primary guy on the pass rush. Because Chase Young did that. He was on the field elevating over the other guys. You knew that the game plan was going to be designed to take him away. Well, it's Tyreke Smith's turn. Now, it helps that he has Zach Harrison, and we're kind of underselling Jonathan Cooper's role here. Berm, I know how much closely you followed his career and how much it means to Ohio State to have a 5th year from him that also wasn't expected. So that helps. I was just going to wind you up on Coop and let you go. But
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that you know what you're going to get, and if you're talking about the leap that Tyreke Smith has to make as far as the motor and the engagement, that comes from Jonathan Cooper. You know, for Chase Young, when that happened, when that light turned on for him, it was the Penn State game in his sophomore year when he realized Nick's not coming back. I need to step up and be the guy. Tyreke, I think that is starting to happen as you said. But that comes from Jonathan Cooper still being in town and saying, "Hey, I may be the emotional leader here, but if we're going to be that level, it's got to be you." Like, Jonathan Cooper is not going to be a first-round pick. You know, he's going to play in the NFL, but Tyreke Smith is a player who could be a first-round pick next year, and a player that when NFL scouts are in Ohio Stadium last year, they go, okay, that's the next one. And at Ohio State and places like it, it doesn't matter how good you are. It matters how good you are for how long. Can you get to your best level and stay there for an entire game? Can you get to your best level and stay there for an entire season? Can you get to your best level and stay there for your career? The Bosa's were great at that. Chase Young got there.
Became good at that, yeah.
Can Tyreke Smith take that? Like, understanding that this is your moment. And it is impossible to describe how important a guy like Jonathan Cooper is to have him there pushing.
I also think it's worth noting that in that room, if you're not at the very best that you can be, you will be passed. And I think, for Tyreke Smith, he had to realize, if I'm not where I need to be, Zach Harrison will pass me. And Jonathan Cooper can be a guy that can disrupt some offenses. I think having that competition in there and telling Tyreke Smith, if you're not the guy, Zach Harrison will be. That can be motivating even within your team.
And I think the return of Cooper is even more important because you don't have a Robert Landers. You don't have a Bosa or a Chase Young, a type that is going to be your vocal leader. And if you look at the rest of those guys, Baptiste, Friday, Zach Harrison, Togiai, Taram, these are not like guys who are rah-rah, I'm going to stand up and be the pound-the-table guy. Jonathan Cooper is that guy.
Yeah.
And so that's a personality that was not going to be on the team this year that is so important in a room that is desperate for somebody to be a leader off the field. And I think that's where Jonathan Cooper – and that's what I'm saying. Maybe it feels like we're underselling him on the field, but his impact off the field is more important than what he can provide on the field as I see it.
Yeah, and they need that veteran presence because, again, there is some big work to do on the inside, defensive tackle, nose, and 3 technique. Those were big losses. Devon Hamilton, what he became last year was an absolute force. I thought that he was a little underrated when it came to the NFL draft. The same could be said, I think, for Ja'Shawn Cornell when he was so effective at that 3 technique role, which, again, I think that's a spot where we're talking about this. Who's gonna fill that role for Ohio State? I think somebody like Tyler Friday could really thrive there. I don't know if that's what's going to happen or not, but filling that production in those 2 inside spots, they are really important to Larry Johnson, Spencer, and he talks about that all the time. And when we talked to him, 5-6 weeks ago, he was still pointing out, like, we got to get this going because Togiai has barely had a chance to be heavily involved in the rotation. That's never happened for Teron Vincent. Who else is going to be in that mix? We'll see what happens.
Well, you got Antoine Jackson, who we haven't mentioned yet, who's in his final season. He's got a lot to prove in one season.
A guy Larry Johnson liked so much, he recruited him twice.
He recruited him twice. You've got Tyler Friday, who, like you said, I predicted actually on our site that he would slide into the 3 technique role. Now, that probably won't happen, but he could play there. And then you've got Teron Vincent, who I think we're kind of underselling as well. I think he can have the kind of year where he just takes off because you didn't hear a lot out of Devon Hamilton last year, but he had, I think, 6 sacks. I think Teron Vincent could have a really big year on the inside because if you line him up against Tommy Togiai is so strong that he's going to attract a lot of attention. I think that 3 technique spot could be even stronger this year because of the attention you have to give a guy like Tommy Togiai.
With Teron, you just don't know. I mean, it's that he was the number 1 ranked defensive tackle in the country coming out of high school. He's a 5-star. He's got NFL genetics. His father played in the NFL, and all these things, right? But none of that stuff matters anymore. You're at Ohio State. You haven't been able to contribute. You miss an entire season because of a shoulder injury. Are you healthy? Have you been doing everything you need to do? We just don't know. And this is one of those weird off seasons that we'll never experience again, hopefully, where we haven't seen any of these. Like normally in normal summer, we'd be over at the Woody watching recruiting camps, and we'd see all these players walking around
and talking to them,
and they'd be teaching and coaching on the field to recruits. And so you'd be like, oh, okay, this dude's been busting his butt. You know who's doing what,
and they would tell us who's been doing it.
Right.
And it's really big because you've got guys like Antoine Jackson and Haskell Garrett who are there, and you just don't know a lot about what they're going to do.
I think Haskell Garrett has as much potential as anybody on the defensive line. And again, he's going into a fourth season at Ohio State. So this is the year you'd expect to see Haskell take that leap, and you'd expect to see Teron take that leap. And I don't want to play ignorant, but we just don't know because we didn't see Larry Johnson, who rotates his dudes like nobody in the country. Normally, we'd have an idea of what that rotation would look like by now, and we just don't.
But at the same time, you've got the defensive end position at Ohio State is you're there for 3 years, you're a first-round pick, and you're off to the NFL. The defensive tackle position, if you look at it, a lot of these guys have emerged late in their careers. And so you've got these guys sitting there in their final year or in their fourth redshirt junior year, something like that you're expecting them to just assume the role as one of the veterans on the defensive line. I think that's a really interesting dynamic. Is you've got the superstars on the outside and then the guys on the inside who usually take a little bit longer to develop.
I think that's where, since we've used some of the old adages and coaching cliches on these positional previews, it's the one where the closer you are to the football, the more mature, the longer it takes for you to really become a star. And I think, we've been talking about Tommy Togiai and his strength since the moment he stepped on campus. It's not like he physically wasn't ready, but using that strength, playing with technique, and understanding what Larry Johnson works, that's a different thing. Haskell Garrett, same deal. It's not like they took 2 or 3 star projects here at defensive tackle. Teron Vincent's going to be in a different position because of his injuries, but you look at Hamilton, you look at Cornell, it just takes time before you can hold up physically and play that nose and not give any inches and take on double teams and 3 technique before you're doing 2 different things, trying to stand up against the rush and be a dominant pass rusher and use those techniques for Larry Johnson. It's hard to do that. It's much easier, and I say that with full qualifications that it's what they're doing is difficult, but if you're going to make an impact on the defensive line, it's just going to be easier on the edge than it is when you're really in it in the middle.
Yeah, and I think, this year is one of those, first year since 2015 when we don't have like a true freshman that you're expecting to get a lot of playing time on the edge. You don't know what you're going to get out of like Noah Potter when he gets in the game. So there's still a whole bunch of young guys that we just haven't seen have a chance to mature. And I think I'm kind of glad that we don't have like that true freshman coming in with all the huge expectations that there was with Zach Harrison and Chase Young and the Bosas. And, right now you have a chance to really see what makes Larry Johnson the best defensive line coach in America and to see the leap that every one of these guys is going to make from last year to this. And
to add to that point, when we saw Darian Henry in camp or in the first day of spring practice, that first drill was rough. To say the least, it was rough. Yeah. He was having to do things 3 and 4 times just to get him down the way Larry Johnson wanted him. I'm interested to see as the fall rolls around how much he and Jacoby Cowan have progressed.
And then Ty Hamilton, because we're talking about replacing Devon. Like Ty Hamilton's a player that Ohio State offered him when he was a 3-star because Larry Johnson was like, I want this kid. Yeah. So that's where you just start to wonder, like, is Larry Johnson so good that he can just pick and choose any player he wants and turn them into an NFL defensive lineman? We're going to find out because this group has a lot of guys that are unproven and a lot of guys that are super talented, but there's more question marks this year than we've had in recent years.
But he's definitely got a deeper pool of resources to work with than just about anybody in the country. That's a tribute to him and a tribute to Ohio State, the way that assembly line of Rushmen has been working. Always great breaking it down with Spencer Holbrook and Jeremy Birmingham right here on our positional previews, brought to you by Byers Auto. We're not done yet. There's still more offseason to go. Join us again next week as we hit the next position in our positional breakdowns at Lettermen Row. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe below to get the latest videos from Lettermen Row.
We got Lettermen Live. We've got the practice report. We got rapid reaction. Hey, and we got Buckeye IQ with Zach Bourne.
For sure. We got recruiting breakdowns with Berm. We got whatever you need. Ohio State football and Ohio State athletics, we've got you covered here at Lettermen Row.